Let's start off with an expense report. So simply by clicking on the icon, it opens up the portal for that employee. And if you wish, you can post historical transaction information for the employee to see, so they have a sense of what's already been approved and posted through for reimbursement. But in other cases, you may just see things that have been approved but not posted. You may have some expense reports that have been rejected, some that are still awaiting approval, some that are open. So the idea here is that you could open and create a new expense report, but not necessarily submit it for approval because you're going through on a daily basis and adding additional expenses. And then you might have pending, where you've submitted it for approval, but you're still waiting for a manager or managers to do their approvals. As I mentioned, when we create a new expense report, you will auto-populate some expense lines based on the configuration of the employee register in the back office. Notice that there's an attachment page that we can attach supporting documents to these transactions. The same will be true for timesheets and requisitions as well. We can also just simply click on a particular line and embed an attachment just by clicking on the attachment icon. Now in this case, we're integrated with project and job cost as well, and we've got a number of different columns. Because these are web forms, each of these columns is customizable, not only to the extent of including or excluding the columns, but also the column headings themselves. So we give you access to the data dictionary within the system so that if you don't like the description expense code, you can change that to anything that you like. Notice also that we have this concept of reimbursable expenses versus non-reimbursable expenses. That's to identify situations where companies are using a corporate credit card to pay for the airfare, but they still want the employee to record that expense on the expense report so that they can see that it's been consumed. We mentioned the fact that it is fully multi-currency. And currently in a Canadian currency, because that's our home currency, the rate is 1.0. But if I change that currency to US dollars, notice that the rate changes to 0.75 and the extended total will then change as well. So this allows us to process expense reports in any currency, and as I've mentioned previously, you'll be able to do reimbursements in any currency as well. For the comments, let's say that this was a conference in Chicago, and let's say the meal was at RPM Italian in Chicago. So for any of you that have been to Chicago, you might have heard of RPM Italian. It's a nice restaurant. If you haven't been and you do find yourself in Chicago, I highly recommend it. And then you can choose the line items that you want to make attachments for. So let's say we're going to attach the airfare receipt. And it's really just a question of browsing and picking up some sort of file format that you want to attach as the airfare receipt. So if this was a smartphone, somebody could take a picture and simply attach that picture to the expense report. In our case, it could be any file type, so that could include a bitmap, a JPEG, a PDF as I've just done, or a Word document, or maybe even an Excel sheet. And this would be my meal receipt. In other cases, you might scan a bunch of documents together and put them all as one attachment. It's really up to you. But this allows you then to identify lines that have attachments on them. And if we're okay with that, then we just simply save the expense report and we submit into the approval workflow. Notice that once we've done that, as long as no approval has been started, we could unsubmit the expense report and resubmit it after we made changes. Once the approval has started, however, the manager would have to reject and send it back to the employee if they wanted changes made. But we also expose the approval audit trail so that the individual knows how many levels of approval this particular expense report is going to need. Note also the action time has a date and time stamp, so every step within the process will be recorded that way We'll identify the individual who's participated in the workflow, and we'll also have a substituted by so that if an individual is away on business or vacation, they can set up a substitution feature that would automatically route the document to the person who's substituting for the person who's away. So when we do that, I'll show you that very quickly here. The substitute employees is this function here where I can come in and specify, let's say I'm going to be away for a week and I need someone else to do my approvals while I'm away, or I could have someone do my expense or timesheet entries or make a leave request or purchase requisition on my behalf. So that's the substitution feature. Notice also that it's multilingual, so if you need French as well as English or maybe Spanish, you can support multiple language sets as part of the system. So I'm going to sign out as Marilyn and sign in as her supervisor, Freddie. Now, Freddie could have received notification for the approval of this expense report just by being in his portal and notifying through the to approved list that there's an expense report generated today, EV41 from February 14th for $333. So he would see that in his approval console, assuming that he's in the console. But he also, if we had set up the email template, he would have received an email with a description of the fact, well, in this case, it's your expense report was approved, but there might have been another one to say it needs to be rejected with reasons, or a submission reminder, or an approval reminder. So you can set these up, and notice that you can embed various variables, but you also have this URL. And the manager would get access to the document directly by clicking on that URL. And that's one of the benefits of having a web-based solution tied into the Windows back office, is that you can have a direct link from the email to the document that needs to be approved. But all these other variables can be embedded as well as part of the email template. So we could have emailed Freddie automatically based on the submission of that expense report, same thing for timesheets, or he would see it through the portal interface when he logs in. And then he can click on this link, open up the expense report. He notes there's attachments here. He can open those up to see the meal receipt and the airfare. In this case, they happen to be product fact sheets. And he notices that there's a conversion rate. He can see the comments here, and all of this information will flow from the portal into the Sage 300 back office. So at this point, they could approve or reject and add their own comments. So we'll approve this expense report and say OK, and off it goes out of the approval console, which begs the question, what's happened with that expense report? Well, as I mentioned, there's seamless integration between the web portal and your Sage 300 back office. The concept with our application is that we want you to be able to capture the data once, as close to the source of the activity as possible. So in the case of an expense report or a timesheet, that is with the actual employee who needs to generate that expense report and timesheet. So we want you to capture that data once, submit it for approval, and create a transaction, which is what we've done now. Once it's been approved, we have a transaction within Sage 300. And the final aspect will be turn that into intelligence through analytical reporting or analysis tools, which we'll show you towards the end of the presentation today. So what's happened with that expense report? Well, the next time somebody in the back office opens up the expense batch list, they'll get a notification that there's an approved document that can be transferred from the ESS, which stands for Employee Self-Service Portal. Would you like to transfer them and create the transaction batch? By saying yes, the system generates that entry for you in the back office without any rekeying, importing, or exporting of the data. So we open up, you can see the batch is February the 14th with the amount that's reimbursable. We can open that up and review the transaction details. So in the case where it's assigned to a project, you have the project phase, work breakdown structure, task, the expense code. In this case, we're billing a customer. We can also see the expense codes that apply, the amounts, the currency, You have both the source amount of $100 Canadian, which is, sorry, US, which is 133 Canadian. So you've got both the source and functional currency if multi-currency is an issue. We have billing rates assigned to this, a divisional regional breakdown, the GL account, and the comments that we added on the expense report are here as well. So all of that information is here. You can click on the detail if you want to, and you can see the expense that was exchange rate at 0.75. Then that was a monthly average. The allocation across division, region, projects. So all that information, including optional fields, is part of the transaction as need be. We also have it flagged to be reimbursable as opposed to non-reimbursable. The other thing that we've moved across from the web portal is the approval audit trail. So you will be able to see both the time and date stamp with comments and the submission and approval steps within the workflow. And the attachments that we attached with the portal are also part of the transaction within Sage 300. So all of the information was captured and moved into Sage 300 seamlessly and now tracks with that transaction, including any totals for tax or expenses. So there are going to be allocated taxes that some are recoverable and some are expensed separately. So those are all set up through the jurisdictions within Sage 300. So wherever possible, we're going to use the same tax authorities that you've already set up for other transactions within Sage 300. We also have the document number for the expense voucher, and in this case, because we're reimbursing through AP, we're going to use the same document number for our AP invoice number. And it's going to be set up against vendor 7100. So we're okay to move this forward now. So by clicking ready to post on the expense, I'm going to auto post and create my AP invoice, which will create my GL transaction batch. And in this case, because we're integrated with project and job cost, we'll see a PJC time card entry as well. So notice that the AP invoice is created up to the GL as well as a PJC transaction for the time card. All of that's created automatically for you. So if we go up to accounts payable, on the invoice batch list, you'll see the amount from today, February the 14th, listed at $333.32, and it's already been posted.